For more, we speak to our U.S. correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, welcome as always. Now, things are obviously moving quite fast since President Trump's social media post impugning South Africa's land expropriation processes on Sunday. What more are we learning from the South African presidency at this time?
Well, when they put out a readout of this nature, you don't often get the, the fly on the wall perspective, Mfundo. They're basically tweeting the South African presidency that President Ramaphosa spoke yesterday to Elon Musk on issues of misinformation and distortions about South Africa. In the process, the president reiterated South Africa's constitutionally embedded values of respect for the rule of law, justice, fairness and equality, and that is the fulsome nature of that post on social media X. I then reached out to Vincent Magwenya, the presidential spokesman, and we had an on-the-record conversation about really what went down in that call. And he frames this as the presidency being, in the main, concerned that any pause to U.S. funding, which is the threat that emanates from Donald Trump's social media post yesterday, would have the impact it would have on the NGO sector in South Africa in particular. The South African presidency felt very strongly, Mfundo, that the social media posts from Trump and then amplified by Musk were a mischaracterization of the country and its laws, and they were very much concerned about the damage these narratives were going to do, particularly, given what you heard from the South African Chamber of Commerce based in the United States. He also says we are next-door neighbors with Zimbabwe. And South Africa acutely understands what went wrong in Zimbabwe and would want to avoid a similar situation in South Africa. South Africa, he says, to this day is dealing with the fallout from the land grabs in Zimbabwe. So there is an acute understanding of not wanting to repeat a similar scenario in South Africa.
The implications thereof.
We don't want another country saying we are grabbing lands. It is unthinkable to have a narrative of rampant land grabs. It's a serious image question for us. He also explained in terms of the Expropriation Act that it has sufficient safeguards, including having the courts as final arbiters on disputes to that process. And then he talked a little bit about the broader relationship with the United States, Mfundo, and he says that despite differences over various foreign policy issues, one thinks of Lady R, the Russian question, the Gaza question, the International Court of Justice question, the relationship, he says, has the offerings of a strong bilateral relationship. Fundamentally, it is a key partnership. And then we talked a little bit about what might have been the catalyst for this whole discussion. Is Elon Musk bringing Starlink to South Africa? And he says that they were surprised that Elon Musk was tweeting about South African laws being openly racist. He says that in previous discussions, Elon Musk had expressed concern about the BEE licensing approval. My understanding is it's around 30% of ownership that would have to be given to a previously disadvantaged group. And he says that wasn't the issue per se for Elon Musk. It was more that the precedent it would set by Starlink having to give 30% ownership to a BEE partner, and what that precedent would set in other countries who might say, well, you gave South African groups 30%, why aren't you doing the same here? So that might be the genesis of why we are having this conversation, why Donald Trump tweeted. Vincent also saying it's the beginning of more conversations. It was an amicable discussion, and there are still expectations that there will be a call between President Ramaphosa and President Trump. And we also understand that DIRCO is working on a call between Ronald Lamola, the International Cooperation Minister, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. Mfundo, I want to quickly play a discussion, part of a discussion I had with President Ramaphosa on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in September last year. He had just met with Elon Musk. This is how that conversation went. Let's watch.
Meeting Elon Musk was a clear intention of mine, because I had spoken to him on the phone, and when I came to New York, I said I'd like to meet him. It's a full process. Some people call it a bromance. It's a whole process of rekindling his affection and connection with South Africa. And of course, it can be a love affair. It can be an investment relationship. He's in businesses that are invested in many parts of the world. And so he is a top layer business person who is very entrepreneurial and would like to interest him more in South Africa in a variety of areas. And he's already looking at our country with some interest in a number of sectors.
I mean, he's a very controversial figure. I know you probably know he's very involved in America, the U.S. election right now, very involved in supporting former President Donald Trump's trajectory in that election. Have you invited him to South Africa? I mean, how does this bromance develop?
Yes, of course. I mean, he's South African born, and
right.
South Africa is his home, as it were. And so I'd like to see him come to South Africa for a visit or a tour or whatever. And he goes to China quite often. And so I said,
Tesla's very big. I think they've got a factory in China, in Shanghai, I believe.
They built a factory in China. So our discussions are at the sort of embryonic level on a number of issues. And we hope to see some progress going forward.
So, a key takeaway, Mfundo, from just, what we're seeing in terms of that phone call and that previous discussion we had with President Ramaphosa is that this love affair, quote, bromance, is not particularly going well right now, but probably needs a little bit more work.
But Sherwin, if we take it back to the posts, in many ways, social media posts can be quite damaging to a country's reputation, particularly when it comes from powerful people like the President of the United States or the world's richest person. Is there a strategy, though, to be more aggressive in how we respond to brazen misinformation like this?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? I think a lot of countries, be that Canada, Colombia, Mexico, Panama, South Africa, the European countries in the European Union, are really beginning to understand how they need to reshape their ability to respond to, social media posts that often are, come out of nowhere. I think there was a lot of surprise in South Africa at the narrative that sort of emanated from Trump's social media posts on Sunday. And what we are learning is the United States is very much, under this America First policy, willing to use its economic superpower-ness, right, to influence the changes it wants, not just in a domestic situation, but very, very much in their foreign relations. It's a question that came up in a discussion with Professor Sean Jacobs, who is the director of the International Affairs Program at the New School, which is a university here in New York. This is what he said.
The best thing for South Africa is to side with those whose sovereignty that Trump has been threatening, whether those countries are in Latin America, Colombia, Brazil, Honduras, in the Arab world, or even, as we now saw the other day, Denmark. My only problem is I don't know if South Africa has a patriotic bourgeoisie or a class of South Africans, those with intellectual power, those with access, to those means, to think for the nation. I think that's maybe part of the problem in South Africa. The people are so quick to criticize and to see the wrong in South Africa and not think, hey, we're part of this there has to be some kind of national project. The point here again is it's South Africa's job to point out to the US that it cannot afford not to have those kind of relationships with South Africa. Like the HIV funding to South Africa, those various other initiatives, those are forms of soft power. I mean, that's my point about anxiety. I think there are people within the US government who understands this and knows that if you alienate South Africa, which is kind of a middle power, if you want, Turkey, South Africa, Brazil, that's not good for the US in a world in which foreign policy is very competitive and which South Africa, rightly, for its own interest, can look elsewhere.
So it's an extremely fine balance between South Africa asserting its patriotism, our government asserting its sovereignty, but also not wanting to shoot itself in the foot from an economic perspective, given the temperament of the leaders that they are engaging with here. So it's a complex dance. Let's keep watching them twirl, Mfundo.
Indeed, Sherwin, a very complex dance. Thank you very much for that reportage. That's SABC News correspondent in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, speaking to us.